The message came at the worst possible time. Yuna was lying under a broken cargo ship, her hands covered in grease, when her communicator started beeping. She almost ignored it. But something made her stop and look. The words on the small screen made her heart go cold. "We regret to inform you that your grandfather, Dong Su, has passed away. You are named as the sole heir to his estate. Please report to the Galactic Inheritance Office on Station Gamma 7 within 10 standard days." Yuna crawled out from under the ship and sat on the cold metal floor. She had not seen her grandfather in almost 15 years. He was a strange old man who lived alone on some forgotten moon in the Outer Rim. Her parents had stopped talking to him long ago. They said he was crazy, always chasing dreams that would never come true. But Yuna remembered him differently. She remembered sitting on his knee as a little girl, listening to his stories about the old days. The days when humans traveled across the stars in slow ships, building new worlds with their own hands. He used to call her Little Star and tell her that humans were special, that they could see treasure where others only saw trash. Now he was gone, and he had left everything to her. 3 days later, Yuna arrived at Station Gamma 7. It was a busy place, full of traders and merchants from 100 different species. Tall Velori with their wet, frog-like skin walked past short Mandari with their 4 arms and sharp teeth. Humans were everywhere too, but they always seemed smaller somehow. Less important, the Galactic Inheritance Office was on the station's lower level. Yuna walked through the door and found herself in a large room with white walls and bright lights. Behind a long desk sat a Velori clerk. He was big, even for his kind, with bulging eyes and green skin that looked slimy. "Name?" he asked in a bored voice. "Yuna. I'm here about my grandfather's estate." Donshu was his name. The Velori typed something into his computer. Then he stopped. His big eyes got even bigger. And then he made a sound that Yuna had never heard before. He was laughing. It was a wet, croaking sound that came from deep in his throat. His whole body shook with it. Other workers in the office looked up. A Mandari woman at the next desk started laughing too, her forearms slapping against her sides. "Is something funny?" Yuna asked. Her face felt hot. "I am sorry," the Velori said, but he did not sound sorry at all. "It is just... Do you know what your grandfather has left you?" "No, that is why I am here." The Velori turned his screen so she could see it. On it was a picture of a moon. But it was not a normal moon. It was covered in garbage. Mountains and mountains of broken ships, old satellites, and twisted metal. It looked like the universe had used it as a trash can for 1,000 years. "Heap 14, the Velori said. "The most famous junkyard in the sector. Your grandfather bought it 40 years ago for almost nothing. And now it is worth even less than nothing." "What do you mean?" "The property taxes alone are 10,000 credits per year. The cleanup costs, if you ever wanted to sell it, would be millions. No one has wanted this moon in decades. Your grandfather died there, alone, surrounded by garbage." The Velori shook his head slowly. "I am sorry for your loss, but I must ask, are you sure you want to accept this inheritance? You can refuse it. Many do, when they see what they are getting." Yuna stared at the picture on the screen. It was ugly. There was no other word for it. Just piles and piles of junk, stretching as far as the camera could see. But then she noticed something. In one corner of the picture, she could see a small building. It was old and simple, but it had lights in the windows. Someone had lived there. Her grandfather had lived there. "What is in the junkyard?" she asked. The Velori shrugged. "Garbage. Old ships from the early days of space travel. Broken satellites. Industrial waste. Nothing valuable. Everything useful was taken long ago." "Then why did my grandfather stay there for 40 years? This question seemed to confuse the Velori. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. "I do not know," he finally said. "Humans are strange sometimes." Perhaps he was simply crazy. Una thought about this. She thought about her grandfather's stories. She thought about the way he used to look at the stars with such hope in his eyes. And she thought about his last message to her, which had arrived along with the news of his death. She had read it 100 times on the journey here. It was short, written in his shaky old handwriting. "My dear little star, if you are reading this, then I am gone. I am sorry I could not see you one more time. But I have left you something important. Not money or power, but something better. I have left you a chance. The humans who came before us knew how to see treasure where others saw trash. Remember what I taught you. Look where no one else is looking. And never, ever give up. I love you, grandfather." The Valori was still waiting for her answer. Behind her, she could hear other aliens whispering and laughing. The crazy human girl who inherited a trash moon. What a joke. Una stood up straight and looked the Valori in his big, wet eyes. "I accept the inheritance," she said. The laughter stopped. The Valori blinked several times, his wide mouth falling open. "Are you certain?" he asked. "This is not a decision you can undo. Once you sign the papers, Heap 14 and all its contents belong to you, along with all the debts and taxes. I am certain." The Valori shook his head sadly, as if he was watching someone walk off a cliff. But he pulled out a stack of papers and pushed them across the desk. "Sign here, and here, and here." Una signed everything. When she was done, the Valori gave her a small metal key and a data chip. "The key is for your grandfather's workshop," he said. "The chip contains all the records of the property. Congratulations on your new estate." He could not quite keep the smile off his face as Una walked out of the office. She heard the laughter start again behind her. The Valori and the Mundari, making jokes about the foolish human girl. She heard words like worthless and crazy, and she will be broke within a year. She did not look back. She just kept walking, holding the key tight in her hand. Outside the office, she found her friend Jisoo waiting for her. Jisoo was a fellow mechanic, a tough woman with short hair and oil stains on her clothes. She had known Una for years. "Well?" Jisoo asked. "What did he leave you?" "A junkyard moon," Una said. Jisoo's eyes went wide. "A junkyard? Like an actual garbage dump?" "Yes, and you accepted it?" "Yes." Jisoo stared at her for a long moment. Then she did something that surprised Una. She smiled. "You know what? I always liked your grandfather. He was weird, but he was smart. And he loved you more than anything. If he left you that junkyard, there must be a reason." Una looked at the key in her hand. It was old and worn, like someone had held it 1,000,000 times. "I think so too," she said. "I do not know what the reason is yet, but I am going to find out." 2 days later, Una stood on the surface of Heap 14. Looking at her inheritance for the first time, it was even worse than the picture, had shown the junkyard stretched in every direction, as far as she could see. Mountains of twisted metal rose up toward the gray sky. Old ships lay on their sides, their hulls broken and rusted. Satellites were tangled together like balls of wire. And everywhere, there was garbage. The air smelled like oil and dust and something old. Something that had been forgotten for a very long time. But in the middle of it all, there was the small building she had seen in the picture. Her grandfather's workshop. It was simple and square, made of metal and concrete. The lights were still on, running on some old power source. Una walked to the door and used her key to open it. Inside, she found a different world. The workshop was clean and organized. Tools hung on the walls in neat rows. Computer screens showed star maps and old data files. And on a workbench in the center of the room, there was a note. Una picked it up and read it. You came. I knew you would. Now the real work begins. Check the computer. File 7G, and remember, treasure, not trash. I believe in you. Grandfather. Una sat down at the computer and opened File 7G. On the screen appeared a map of the Junkyard, marked with coordinates and notes. And in the deepest part of the map, in a section labeled First Expansion Ships, there was a single blinking dot. Her grandfather had been searching for something, and he had finally found it, 3 days before he died. The news spread across the sector like fire through dry grass. Within 2 days, everyone seemed to know about the foolish human girl who had accepted the worthless Junkyard moon. Una saw the stories on every news channel. Human inherits galaxy's biggest garbage dump, one headline said. New owner of Heap 14 expected to go bankrupt within months, said another. The Valori business networks made jokes about it. The Mandari entertainment shows turned it into a comedy segment. One popular show even sent a reporter to interview her. Una refused to speak to them, but they filmed her Junkyard from orbit and laughed about it for 10 minutes. Look at all that human garbage, the host said. I guess when your species spent centuries flying around in slow metal boxes, you learn to love trash. The audience thought this was very funny, but Una did not care about the news. She was too busy reading her grandfather's files. Dongsu had left behind thousands of documents. Notes, maps, calculations, research papers. He had spent 40 years studying the Junkyard, cataloging its contents, searching for something specific. At first, Una did not understand what he was looking for. The files were confusing, full of references to things she had never heard of. Then her brother arrived. Taiwu was 5 years older than Una. He worked in the core worlds as a business manager for a shipping company. He was practical, careful, and very good with numbers. When he heard about the inheritance, he took emergency leave from his job and flew out to help her. You should have called me before you signed anything, he said when he stepped off his shuttle. He looked around at the mountains of garbage and shook his head. This place is a disaster. Hello to you too, brother, Una said. Taiwu sighed and hugged her. I am sorry. I am not angry at you. I am just worried. Do you know how much the taxes on this place are? Do you know how much debt grandfather left behind? I know, Una said. But I also know that he was looking for something. And I think he found it. She took Taiwu to the workshop and showed him the files. At first, he was skeptical. He read through the documents with a frown on his face, shaking his head every few minutes. But as the hours passed, his expression began to change. He was organized, Taiwu said slowly. Very organized. This is not the work of a crazy person. This is the work of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. What was he doing? Taiwu pointed at the screen. Look at these categories. He divided the Junkyard into sections based on age and origin. And look here, this section is marked First Expansion Era. He seems to have been very interested in the oldest part of the Junkyard. Una nodded. The map he left me points there too, to something called Sector 7G. First expansion, Taiwu said thoughtfully. That was before we met the aliens, right? When humans were alone in the universe. Yes, the old ships. The slow ones. The first expansion was a period in human history that most people tried to forget. Before humans discovered faster than light travel, they had spent centuries crossing the stars in enormous slow ships. Generation ships, they were called. Whole families would be born, grow old, and die during a single journey. Thousands of people living their entire lives inside metal boxes, never seeing their destination. When humans finally met the Valori and gained access to better technology, the old ships became useless. They were abandoned, sold for scrap, or dumped in places like Heap 14. Now they were just garbage. Reminders of a primitive time that everyone wanted to forget. The aliens found the whole thing very funny. They loved to joke about the coffin ships and the foolish humans who had wasted generations traveling at slow speeds. It was proof, they said, that humans were a young and stupid species who needed alien help to survive. Why would grandfather care about those old ships? Yuna asked. There is nothing valuable in them. Everyone knows that. Taiwu looked at her with a strange expression. Everyone knows that, he repeated. But does everyone really know? Or is that just what the aliens told us? Yuna thought about this. She thought about her grandfather's words. See treasure where others see trash. We need to go to Sector 7G, she said. But getting there was not easy. The Junkyard was enormous, and the oldest sections were buried under centuries of newer garbage. The paths were dangerous, full of sharp metal and unstable piles that could collapse at any moment. Their small hover vehicle could only go so far before the debris became too thick. While they planned their journey, more messages arrived. Some were from reporters wanting interviews. Some were from lawyers warning them about debts. And some were from the Valori. The Valori Consortium was the most powerful business group in the sector. They controlled fuel, transportation, and trade. And for some reason, they were very interested in Heap 14. We understand you have recently inherited this property, their message said. We would like to offer our assistance. The moon is clearly a burden to you. We are prepared to take it off your hands for 1 credit. We will even forgive all existing debts and taxes. This is a very generous offer. You should accept it immediately. 1 credit. For an entire moon. Yuna showed the message to Taiwu. His face went pale. They want it, he said. They want the Junkyard. Why would they want it if it is worthless? Maybe it is not worthless, Yuna said. She sent a polite reply refusing the offer. The next day, a new message arrived. This one was less polite. It talked about legal complications and property, disputes, and the importance of cooperation between species. It suggested that Yuna was making a big mistake. She refused again. Third message was from a different source. The Mandari Trade Council. They also wanted to buy the Junkyard. Their offer was slightly higher, 10 credits. But their message carried the same threat hidden beneath the polite words. Something is wrong here, Taiwu said. These are the 2 biggest powers in the sector. Why do they both want a garbage dump? Grandfather knew something, Yuna said. He found something. That is why he stayed here for 40 years. That is why he would not sell. And that is why they want it. That night, Yuna sat alone in her grandfather's workshop, reading his personal journal. Most of it was technical notes and observations. But near the end, the writing became more personal. I am running out of time, one entry said. My body is failing, but my mind is clear. I know the ship is there. I can feel it. The scans confirm it. But I cannot reach it alone. I am too old, too weak. I have to trust that someone will come after me. Someone who will understand. The next entry was dated 3 days later. The handwriting was shaky, barely readable. I found it today. Used the new scanner. It is really there, exactly where I thought. The Wanderer's Hope, a manufacturing vessel from the First Fleet, fully intact. Buried under 50 meters of garbage, but intact. Everything we lost is inside. Everything they made us forget. I wish I could see it with my own eyes. But my heart, I can feel it stopping. No matter, Yuna will come. She always was the one who understood me. She will finish what I started. I am sorry I cannot be there to help her. But I believe in her. My little star. There were no more entries after that. Yuna closed the journal and wiped her eyes. Outside the workshop window, the mountains of garbage blocked out the stars. Somewhere out there, buried under decades of trash, was something her grandfather had spent his whole life searching for. The aliens were laughing at her. The powerful corporations were threatening her. Everyone thought she was a fool, but her grandfather had believed in her, and she was not going to let him down. The next morning, she woke Taiwu early. "We are going to Sector 7G, she said. "Today." Taiwu looked at her tired face and nodded. "What do you need?" "The old scanners grandfather used, the hover vehicle, and a lot of patience." They loaded their equipment and set off into the junkyard. The journey took all day. They had to climb over mountains of debris, cut through walls of twisted metal, and find paths through canyons of broken ships. Several times, they had to turn back and find new routes when the way became impossible. But finally, as the sun was setting, they reached Sector 7-G. It was the oldest part of the junkyard. The ships here were different from the others. They were bigger, stranger, built in styles that no one used anymore. First expansion vessels, from the days when humanity was young and alone in the universe. Yuna pulled out her grandfather's scanner and turned it on. The screen flickered to life, showing a map of the area. And there, deep below the surface, was a large object that made her heart stop. "It is real," she whispered. The scanner showed a massive structure buried under 50 meters of debris. It was bigger than anything else in the junkyard. And according to the readings, it was almost completely intact. A ship. A first expansion manufacturing vessel. Hidden in the garbage for centuries. And somehow, her grandfather had found it. "What is a manufacturing vessel?" Taiwu asked, looking over her shoulder. Yuna remembered the old stories. The ones her grandfather used to tell her when she was a child. During the first expansion, humans could not buy supplies from anyone. There were no aliens to trade with. So some ships were built to make things. Everything a colony would need. Tools, machines, medicine, even other ships. They called them the heart of the fleet. And this one is still intact? Yuna looked at the scanner readings again. According to this, yes. The vacuum of space preserved it. All these years, while everyone was dumping garbage on top of it, it was just waiting. It took them 2 weeks to reach the ship. 2 weeks of hard work, long days, and very little sleep. Yuna and Taiwu used every tool they had to clear a path through the debris. They moved broken satellites, cut through walls of twisted metal, and dug through layers of garbage that had been piling up for centuries. The work was slow and dangerous. Twice, piles of debris collapsed and nearly buried them. Once, Taiwu cut his arm on a sharp piece of metal and had to stop for a day while Yuna patched him up. But they kept going. Every night, they fell asleep exhausted. Every morning, they woke up and continued digging. They could not hire help. They could not tell anyone what they were doing. The Valori and Mandari were still sending messages, each one more threatening than the last. If those corporations discovered what was buried in Sector 7G, they would find a way to take it. Yuna was certain of that. So she and Taiwu worked alone, in secret, following the path that their grandfather had marked on his maps. On the 14th day, they broke through. Yuna was operating a small cutting laser when suddenly the debris in front of her fell away. Behind it was something that made her drop her tools and stare. A wall. Not a pile of garbage. A real wall made of smooth metal, still shining after all these years. "Taiwu," she shouted. "Come here." Her brother ran over and stopped beside her. For a long moment, they just looked at the wall in silence. "We found it," Taiwu whispered. They cleared more debris around the wall and found an airlock. The door was old but solid, covered with writing in an ancient style of Korean that Yuna could barely read. But she could make out the name painted above the door in faded letters. "Wanderer's Hope," she read aloud. Just like grandfather's journal said, the airlock controls were dead. There was no power reaching this part of the ship. But Yuna had brought her grandfather's tools, including a small fusion battery that could power almost anything. She connected it to the control panel and waited. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, lights began to flicker on. The control panel beeped. And with a grinding sound of machinery that had not moved in centuries, the airlock door began to open. Cold air rushed out, carrying the smell of something very old. Yuna and Taiwu turned on their flashlights and stepped inside. The interior of the ship was dark and silent. Their footsteps echoed in the empty hallways. Everything was covered in a thin layer of dust, but underneath, the ship was perfectly preserved. No rust, no decay. The vacuum of space had protected it from time. They walked through corridors that were wider than any modern ship. They passed rooms full of equipment that Yuna did not recognize. Everything was labeled in that old writing, giving instructions for machines that no one had used in generations. "This is incredible," Taiwu said, running his hand along the wall. "It is like walking through a museum." But Yuna was looking for something specific. Her grandfather's notes had mentioned a central storage area, a place where the ship's most important contents were kept. She followed the signs on the walls until she found it. The door was sealed with a heavy lock. When Yuna powered it up and entered the access code from her grandfather's files, the lock clicked open. Behind the door was a room the size of a warehouse. And inside that room, arranged in neat rows, were thousands of storage containers. Yuna opened the first container and found memory cores. Hundreds of them, each one the size of her fist. She plugged one into her scanner and watched as data began to flow across the screen. Technical documents, engineering designs, scientific research. Everything that humanity had known before first contact stored on these tiny devices. The second container held seeds. Millions of seeds, preserved in special packages, waiting to be planted. The labels showed plants from Earth, species that had gone extinct centuries ago, when humanity started depending on alien food sources. The third container was full of manufacturing templates. Detailed plans for building everything from simple tools to complex machines. Yuna scrolled through the list and stopped when she saw one item that made her heart beat faster. Fusion reactor designs. She knew about fusion reactors. Everyone did. They were the main source of power in the galaxy. But there was a problem. Modern fusion reactors needed special fuel, a rare isotope that only the Valori knew how to produce. The Valori controlled 80% of the galaxy's fuel supply. Every species, including humans, had to buy from them at whatever price they demanded. But this design was different. Yuna read through it carefully, checking the specifications twice, 3 times. This reactor did not use Valori isotopes. It used materials that could be found on almost any planet. Materials that were cheap and common. "Taiwu," she said quietly. "Come look at this." Her brother walked over and studied the screen. His eyes grew wider as he read. "This cannot be real," he said. "A fusion reactor that does not need Valori fuel? That would change everything." "It is real," Yuna said. "Our ancestors built them. They powered their ships with them for centuries. But when we met the Valori, they convinced us that their technology was better. We abandoned our own designs and became dependent on their fuel. Why would we do that?" Yuna thought about all the history she had learned in school. The official story was that human technology was primitive and inferior. The aliens had saved humanity by sharing their advanced knowledge. Everyone believed this. It was in every textbook, every documentary, every news story. But now, looking at these designs, Yuna was not so sure. The technology in this ship was not primitive at all. It was different, yes, built with different methods and different materials. But it was not inferior. Maybe we did not choose to abandon it, she said slowly. Maybe we were tricked. They spent the next 3 days exploring the ship and cataloging its contents. What they found was beyond anything Yuna had imagined. The Wanderer's Hope was not just a storage ship. It was a complete manufacturing facility, capable of building almost anything from raw materials. Its computers held the sum of human knowledge from the first expansion era: medicine, engineering, agriculture, physics, chemistry. Everything that humanity had learned in the centuries before. First contact. And almost all of it had been forgotten. Yun found records showing what had happened after humans met the Valori. Trade agreements that gave aliens control over human technology. Educational reforms that removed old knowledge from schools. Economic deals that made humans dependent on alien suppliers for basic needs. Generation by generation, humans had forgotten their own history. They had been taught that they were the young, primitive species who needed alien guidance. They had stopped building their own machines and started buying from others. They had abandoned the knowledge that their ancestors had worked so hard to create. This was deliberate, Taiwu said, his voice shaking with anger as he read the old documents. The Valori and the Mindari did this on purpose. They made us weak so they could control us. And now we have a chance to fix it, Yuna said. But first, they had a problem. The ship's contents were valuable beyond measure, but they could not use any of it while they were hiding on a Junkyard moon. Surrounded by hostile corporations, they needed legal protection. They needed patents and ownership rights. They needed someone who understood the complex laws of galactic trade. Yuna thought of only one person who could help. Her old friend. Myray had grown up on the same station as Yuna. They had played together as children, dreamed together as teenagers, and then gone their separate ways as adults. Myray had studied law and become an expert in galactic intellectual property. She now worked for a small human-owned law firm on Station Gamma-7. Yun sent her a message with just 3 words. I need you. Myray arrived 2 days later. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and a quick mind. When she saw the Junkyard, she laughed out loud. When she saw the ship, she stopped laughing. When she saw the contents of the storage containers, she sat down on the floor and was quiet for a very long time. Do you understand what this means? She finally said. We have a lot of old technology, Taiwu said. No, Myray said. You have leverage. You have power. These fusion reactor designs alone are worth more than most planets. If we can get them patented before anyone else knows about them, can we do that? Yuna asked. Is it legal? Myray was already thinking, her lawyer's brain working through the possibilities. The original patents from the first expansion era have all expired. This knowledge is technically in the public domain. But because no one knew it existed, no one has claimed it. If we file new patents based on these designs, we could control them. How long would that take? Normally, years. The Valori and Mindari would fight us every step of the way. Myray smiled a dangerous smile. But I know some tricks. There are old trade agreements that humans signed but never used. Loopholes that the aliens forgot about. If we move fast enough, we can have these designs protected before anyone realizes what is happening. Yuna looked at her brother and her friend. They were standing in a forgotten ship, surrounded by centuries of lost knowledge. About to challenge the most powerful forces in the galaxy, it was the craziest thing she had ever done. Let's get started, she said. For the next week, they worked without rest. Myray prepared thousands of patent applications. Taiwu organized the technology into categories and priorities. Yuna translated the old designs into modern formats that the patent offices would accept. The first sign that something had changed came from the Valori. Their messages stopped being threatening. They stopped being polite. They just stopped. For 3 days. There was complete silence from the most powerful corporation in the sector. Then the offers started coming. "We would like to discuss a partnership," the first message said. "We believe there may have been some misunderstandings in our previous communications. We are prepared to offer very generous terms." The next message was more direct. "We will pay 10 billion credits for exclusive rights to the fusion reactor technology. This is our final offer. You should accept it immediately." When Yuna did not respond, the offers got higher. 20 billion, 50 billion, 100 billion credits. Numbers so large that Yuna could barely understand them. The Mandari were even more aggressive. They did not bother with messages. They sent a delegation directly to Heap 14. 3 Mandari executives in expensive suits. Demanding to speak with the new owner, Yuna met them at the edge of the Junkyard, with Taiwu and Mireille standing beside her. The Mandari looked around at the piles of garbage and barely hid their disgust. "You are the human called Yuna?" the lead executive asked. He was tall for a Mandari, with 4 arms crossed over his chest and a permanent frown on his face. "I am. We represent the Mandari Trade Council. We understand you have recently filed certain patent applications. We are here to make you an offer." Yuna waited. 200 billion credits, the Mandari said. "For all the technology you have registered. You will become wealthy beyond your dreams. You can live anywhere you want, do anything you want. All we ask is that you sign these documents and transfer the patents to us." He held out a datapad with the contracts already prepared. Yuna looked at the number on the screen. 200 billion credits. It was more money than most human colonies earned in a century. With that much wealth, she could buy her own planet. She could never work another day in her life. But she thought about her grandfather. She thought about the 40 years he had spent searching for the truth. She thought about all the humans who had been taught to believe they were inferior, who had been forced to buy fuel and food from aliens at unfair prices, who had forgotten their own history. "No," she said that the Mandari's frown deepened. "I do not think you understand. This offer will not be repeated. If you refuse, we will find other ways to get what we want. Are you threatening me? I am explaining reality. The Mandari Trade Council has resources you cannot imagine. We can make your life very difficult, or we can make it very easy. The choice is yours." Yuna smiled. It was not a friendly smile. "Let me explain some reality to you. I own patents for fusion reactor technology that does not need Valori fuel. I own patents for agricultural techniques that do not need Mandari pesticides. I own patents for manufacturing processes that do not need any of your supplies. If I choose to release this technology freely, your entire economy will collapse within a year." The Mandari's 4 arms dropped to his sides. His face went pale. "You would not dare try me." The delegation left without another word. Yuna watched them go, feeling something she had not felt in a long time: power. But she knew the fight was not over. The Valori and Mandari would not give up so easily. They would find other ways to attack her. Legal challenges, political pressure, maybe even something worse. She needed to move fast over the next month. Yuna and her team worked to build something that had never existed before. A human-owned technology company that could compete with the alien giants. They called it the Yuna Foundation. And its headquarters was the very Junkyard that everyone had laughed at. Workers came from all over the sector, humans who had heard about what Yuna was doing and wanted to help. Engineers, scientists, lawyers, administrators. Within weeks, Heap 14 was no longer a garbage dump. It was a factory. The first products came off the assembly line just 40 days after the patents were filed. Small fusion generators, cheap enough for ordinary people to afford, powerful enough to run a whole household. They did not need Valori fuel. They could run on materials found on almost any planet. Una priced them at 1/10 of what the Valori charged for equivalent power. Then she started selling them to human colonies. The effect was immediate. Colonies that had been paying huge amounts for Valori fuel suddenly had an alternative. A cheaper alternative. A human alternative. Orders flooded in faster than the factory could fill them. The Valori tried to fight back. They lowered their prices, offered special deals, threatened to stop selling to anyone who bought from Una. But it was too late. The humans did not trust the Valori anymore. They had seen that there was another way. Next came the agricultural technology. Seeds from the Wanderer's Hope were grown in special labs, producing crops that did not need Mendari pesticides or fertilizers. These plants were stronger, healthier, and easier to grow than anything the Mendari sold. And they belonged to humanity. Una gave the seeds away for free to any human colony that wanted them. The Mendari complained to the Galactic Trade Commission, claiming unfair competition. The case was thrown out. The technology was properly patented. There was nothing illegal about giving away your own property. By the end of the third month, everything had changed. The Valori fuel monopoly was breaking. The Mendari food supply chain was collapsing. Human colonies that had been dependent on alien corporations for generations were suddenly becoming self-sufficient. And Una's Junkyard was worth more than most planetary systems. The news channels that had mocked her were now telling a different story. The Junkyard Queen, they called her. The woman who broke the monopolies. Reporters came from every corner of the sector, wanting interviews, wanting to understand how a poor human mechanic had become the wealthiest person in the region. Una refused most of the interviews. She was too busy. But one day, a message arrived that she could not ignore. It was from the Galactic Trade Commission, the organization that oversaw all commerce between species. They wanted to speak with her about the future of the sector's economy. The meeting was held on a neutral space station, in a large conference room with windows looking out at the stars. Una brought Taiwu and Mireille with her. On the other side of the table sat representatives from every major species in the sector. Valori, Mendari, and half a dozen others. The chairman was a Valori, old and tired-looking. He spoke first. "You have caused a great deal of disruption," he said. "The balance of trade that has existed for centuries is falling apart. Many are worried about what will happen next." "The balance of trade was not fair," Una replied. "It favored your species at the expense of mine. I am simply restoring some equality. By giving away technology for free? By destroying established markets? By giving humans a choice. For the first time in generations, my people can decide for themselves what they want to buy and from whom. Is that not what free trade is supposed to mean?" The Mendari representative spoke up. "You are naive if you think this will end well. The galactic economy is complex. If you destroy the existing systems, there will be chaos. Everyone will suffer." Mireille leaned forward. "We are not destroying anything. We are offering alternatives. Your species are welcome to compete, but you will have to compete fairly at honest prices without using monopoly power to exploit others." "And what do you want in return?" the chairman asked. "More wealth? Political power? A seat on this council?" Una shook her head. "I want fair trade agreements. I want human colonies to be treated as equal partners, not as customers to be exploited. I want the knowledge that was stolen from my people to be returned and taught in our schools. And I want your monopolies to end." The room was silent for a long moment. "These are large demands," the chairman finally said. "They are fair demands, and I am in a position to make them." The negotiations lasted for 3 days. The Valori fought every point. The Mendari threatened to walk out several times. But in the end, they had no choice. Yuna's patents gave her too much power. If she wanted to, she could destroy their entire economy. The final agreement was called the HFY Accords. It established new rules for trade between humans and aliens. Fair pricing, open technology sharing, equal treatment in all commercial matters. It was not perfect, but it was a beginning. When the signing ceremony was over, Yuna walked to the window and looked out at the stars. Taiwu came to stand beside her. "Grandfather would be proud," he said. "I hope so," Yuna replied. "But we are not done yet. This is just the first step. What comes next?" Yuna thought about all the lost knowledge they had found in the Wanderer's Hope, all the technology, all the history, all the potential that had been buried under garbage for centuries. "Next," she said, "we show the galaxy what humans can really do." Back on Heap 14, the work continued. The Junkyard was being transformed, piece by piece, into something new. The old garbage was being sorted, recycled, turned into raw materials for the factories. The broken ships were being repaired and refitted. The abandoned satellites were coming back to life, and in the center of it all, in the small workshop where Dongsu had spent his final days, Yuna kept his journal on her desk. A reminder of where this had all started. A reminder of the man who had believed in her when no one else did. She picked up the journal and read his final words one more time. "See treasure where others see trash. I believe in you." 1 year had passed since Yuna first set foot on Heap-14. She stood at the window of her new office, looking out at a view that would have been unrecognizable to anyone who had seen the Junkyard before. Where there had once been mountains of garbage, there were now clean buildings and busy streets. Where there had been abandoned ships, there were now factories and research centers. Where there had been nothing but waste, there was now hope. The Yuna Foundation had grown beyond anything she had imagined. 10,000 people now worked on Heap 14, building a new future for humanity. Engineers and scientists came from every human colony, drawn by the chance to work with technology that their ancestors had created. Young people applied for jobs every day, eager to be part of something important. The moon that everyone had laughed at was now the most important place in the sector. But Yuna had not forgotten where it all started. In the middle of the new campus, surrounded by modern buildings and busy streets, stood a small, simple structure. Her grandfather's workshop, preserved exactly as he had left it. It was now a museum, visited by thousands of people every month. Today was special. Today was the anniversary of Dongsu's death. And Yuna had prepared something to honor his memory. She walked to the museum and found Taiwu and Mai waiting for her at the entrance. Taiwu had become the Foundation's chief operating officer, managing the day-to-day work of running their growing organization. Mai led the legal team, protecting their patents and negotiating with alien governments. They had both given up their old lives to be part of this dream. "Are you ready?" Taiwu asked. Yuna nodded. They walked inside together. The workshop looked exactly as it had on the day Yuna first arrived. The tools still hung on the walls. The computer screen still showed old star maps. The workbench still held her grandfather's notes. But today, there was something new. In the center of the room, a small crowd had gathered. Human workers from the Foundation, reporters from news channels across the sector, and, standing apart from the others, a young Valori in a simple gray uniform. His name was Bora, and he was the son of the clerk who had laughed at Yuna on that first day at the inheritance office. He had asked to visit Heap 14 to see what the humans had built, to understand, Una walked to the center of the room and waited for silence. 1 year ago, she began. I stood in an office on Station Gamma 7 and signed papers accepting an inheritance that everyone thought was worthless. A junkyard moon, covered in garbage, buried in debt. The aliens laughed at me. They thought I was a fool. She paused and looked around the room. But my grandfather knew something that they did not. He knew that humanity's greatest treasure was not money or power. It was knowledge. The knowledge that our ancestors built over centuries, the wisdom that they carried with them across the stars. That knowledge was stolen from us, hidden from us, made us forget who we really were. But it was never truly lost. It was just waiting to be found. Una walked to the workbench and picked up her grandfather's journal. Dongsu spent 40 years searching for that knowledge. He died 3 days before he could see it with his own eyes. But he never gave up. He believed that someday, someone would come who would finish what he started. He believed in me. She opened the journal to the last page, where her grandfather's final words were written in shaky handwriting. He wrote, "See treasure where others see trash. I believe in you, little star." Those words have guided me through the hardest moments of the past year. When the Valori threatened us, when the Mendari tried to destroy us, when everyone said we would fail, I remembered those words. And I kept going. Una closed the journal and looked at the young Valori standing in the corner. "Bora," she said. "Please come here." The young alien walked forward slowly, looking nervous. The crowd watched in silence. "Your father laughed at me when I came to claim this inheritance," Una said. "Do you remember what he said?" Bora nodded, his face turning darker with embarrassment. He said humans were foolish. He said we would never understand the value of anything. He was wrong, Una said. But I do not blame him. He was taught to think that way, just as humans were taught to think we were inferior. For centuries, our species have misunderstood each other. We have competed when we should have cooperated. We have laughed when we should have listened. She held out her hand to Bora. I am done with that old way of thinking. The technology we found in the Wanderer's Hope belongs to humanity, but we are willing to share it. Not for profit, not for power, but because it is the right thing to do. I am offering fair trade agreements to any species that wants to work with us as equals, including the Valori. Bora stared at her hand for a long moment. Then, slowly, he reached out and took it. The room erupted in applause. Later that day, Una walked through the grounds of the Foundation, watching the work that was happening everywhere. In one building, engineers were designing a new generation of spacecraft based on first expansion technology. In another, scientists were studying the seeds from the Wanderer's Hope, developing new crops that could grow on any planet. In a third, teachers were training the next generation of human innovators. She stopped at a viewing platform that looked out over the old junkyard. Most of it had been cleaned up now, but a small section had been preserved. A reminder of where it all started. Myrae came to stand beside her. "The news channels are saying wonderful things about your speech today," Myrae said. "They are calling you a visionary, a leader. Some are even using the word hero." Una shook her head. "I am not a hero. I just did what my grandfather taught me to do. I looked where no one else was looking. I found treasure where others saw trash. That is what makes you a hero." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the stars come out. "What happens now?" Myrae asked. "Now we keep building," Una said. The Heap 14 Accords were just the beginning. There are still human colonies that need help. There are still technologies to be recovered and shared. There is still so much work to do. And the Valori? The Mendari? You do not think they will try to stop us? Maybe, but they have learned that humans are not easy to stop. We are patient. We are determined. We know how to see treasure where others see trash. That is our greatest strength. Yuna looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, in the vast emptiness of space, there were other ships from the first expansion. Other vessels full of forgotten knowledge, waiting to be found. Other treasures hidden in the garbage of history, thought she would find them. All of them. A young worker ran up to the platform, out of breath with excitement. Ms. Yuna, we just got a signal from the Deep Space Survey team. They found something. What did they find? Another ship. A first expansion hospital vessel, buried in an asteroid belt 3 systems away. The scans show it is completely intact. Yuna smiled. She looked at Mireille, then at Taiwu, who had just arrived at the platform. Get a team ready, she said. We leave tomorrow. Taiwu grinned. Another Junkyard adventure? Another treasure hunt. As they walked back toward the Foundation headquarters, Yuna took one last look at her grandfather's workshop. The lights were on inside, just as they had been on the day she arrived. A small building in the middle of a former garbage dump, now the heart of humanity's renaissance. She thought about Dongsu, alone in that workshop for 40 years, never giving up, never losing hope. He had known that someday, someone would come who understood. Someone who would see what others could not see. Someone who would finish what he started. He had been right, and now, because of him, humanity was rising. Not through war or conquest, but through knowledge and determination. Through the simple belief that there was treasure in places where others only saw trash. The aliens had laughed when she inherited a junkyard. They were not laughing now. They were watching. They were learning. And some of them, like young Bora, were starting to understand. Yuna walked into the headquarters building, ready for the next adventure. Behind her, the stars shone down on Heap 14, brighter than they had ever shone before. And somewhere, in whatever place the dead go when their work is finally done, Dongsu smiled. His little star had found her way home.